It is with great pleasure that my wife and I welcome you to Windsor Castle on this, your second state visit to the United Kingdom.
High on the hill was a lonely goat herd, lay, hoodle-lay, hoodle-lay, ooh. Loud was the voice of the lonely goat herd.
Please welcome BTS!
What do K-pop, the sound of music, British royalty and kangaroos have in common? They all act as brand recognition for their countries.
Stunning performance from the All Blacks. 62.
And you have my bow.
And my axe.
In New Zealand, our equivalents are dairy, lamb, wine, Lord of the Rings, rugby, and the visibility of Indigenous culture. But some of that is ageing out, some of it is fading away, and some of it we just don't make enough of. We're too often seen as the scenic backdrop rather than the creative originator.
I think from an economic sense, it would be great to, have perhaps some big consumer brands or some more products which New Zealand's economy could benefit from, and that perhaps New Zealand could be kind of put on the map for as well.
I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, I'm on a power trip looking at two recent reports, one global and one local, on how we're seen internationally. One is the Brand Finance Global Soft Power Index for 2025, which measures all 193 member states of the United Nations in terms of what people from other countries think of you. The other is NZ Story's Market Pulse report on how we're perceived across 7 key trading markets: Australia, China, India, Japan, Singapore, the UK and the US. David Downs is the CEO of New Zealand Story, whose job it is to work on Brand NZ, to expand the country's reputation and value internationally. To do that, we need to work on wielding our soft power.
So soft power is the idea that countries need to have influence in the world beyond military. So in hard power, which is the opposite, obviously, things like military or financial wealth or whatever like that. So those are the big countries that can sort of exert influence in the world in different ways. When you're a small country or a medium-sized like New Zealand, it's all an advanced economy, you have to influence through negotiation. You have to get other people, work alongside other people in a different way. And that's kind of collectively called soft power. So country soft power is actually very important in terms of creating connections and relationships and kind of, batting above our weight, cliches that we have there about that. So for New Zealand, that's, how we influence other countries, how we have a position or a status in the world.
And it would also save money, one would presume. I mean, you've got that investment in going out to meet other people in other countries and tourism, etc. But doesn't mean you don't have to have as many tanks on the ground or fighters in the air.
I don't think we've got any tanks, have we? But no, it's all fighters for that matter. But I mean, yes, you want to, as New Zealand, we have to create trading connections. We also have to attract investment, tourism, students to come to visit, whatever it is, buy other countries buying our products and services. So New Zealand's soft power and our reputation as a trustworthy country, as a friend you can rely on, it's a critical part of our international kind of relations strategy. And building soft power is something that, successive governments successively, over hundreds of years actually has built up New Zealand's international reputation.
Is soft power real power?
I think it is. I think the world is changing, though. I think it's pretty obvious to everyone that hard power is now back. There are wars, there are countries that are sort of actively going away from global treaties, etc. So the world is tumultuous, but I'd say since the Second World War and certainly the last sort of 20 years or so, soft power's been a very important part of the kind of international fabric. I would say also that it still is for New Zealand. We need to create a tight connection with the rest of the world. We need to be seen as trustworthy and respected, because otherwise we can't influence in any other way. It's got to be through those sorts of connections. And soft power is made up of lots of things. It's the things you do and stand for. The rule of law, how you're perceived as a country, trustworthy, reliable. How you're considered in terms of your culture and your arts and your treatment of Indigenous peoples. All these sorts of things make up kind of soft power.
And the reason we're talking to you now is there is a new report, there's an annual report, isn't there?
Yeah, we do a research report at New Zealand Story, that's right.
As well, the Global Soft Power Index
That's right.
2025 is also out. So two different things, but about
But they build on each
kind
other.
of area.
Yeah,
Right.
so there's soft power can be measured. There's a number of measures actually, but the one that we look at most is a thing called the Global Soft Power Index. It's a global thing. It's done by a London-based organisation, and they look at countries' perceptions of each other. So it's complicated, and they go out to hundreds of thousands of people and understand what is your perception in India of New Zealand, what is your perception in Mexico of New Zealand, and vice versa. And that's a really deep data source, but that tells you what people are thinking.
Right.
And every year we look at that and we study it. New Zealand enjoys a very strong position.
where are we this year?
This year we're number 25 in terms of ranking. So of all the countries in the world, we're the 25th, if you like, highest in terms of soft power.
That's not bad.
It's pretty good, and we've been as high as 16 before, actually, during the COVID years. But 20 in the 20s is normally where we sit ourselves. And think about this is against Canada and the United States and Russia and all these other countries, like big countries, small countries, and we sit there pretty proudly. Even more importantly, we're 14th in terms of reputation. So in terms of being considered as a reputable, trustworthy country, we're even higher. So soft power has all these dimensions. Some of it is reputation, some of it is familiarity. So we tend to have a high reputation, slightly less in terms of familiarity. So people know they like us, but they don't know quite why.
Yeah. And I see Australia has got a far greater rating on the familiarity stakes, but also this lifts them into what number are they?
I think they're in something like that. They're in the tens, yeah.
So how much of this is people thinking, oh yeah, I know kangaroos come from Australia, or I know Lord of the Rings was shot in New Zealand?
There's definitely that. I mean, certainly, and all our research tells us that those sort of benchmarks are still important, that people need to know about countries for a reason. I mean, there are many, many countries of the same sort of population and size as New Zealand, and yet we are much, much higher up than they are. So that's for reasons, it's because they do know a little bit about Māori culture and the haka. They do know a little bit about our film industry, but they don't know a lot. And so what they do know is attractive and positive. So we actually enjoy this really strong reputation, but actually a relatively lower familiarity. And a lot of what we're trying to do at New Zealand Story is sort of fill in the blanks. Like, you love New Zealand, you've got this sort of utopian sometimes view of New Zealand. Actually, here's some things about New Zealand that you might not realise, but will help reinforce that perception.
But how do you do that without absolutely busting this tourism budget wide open?
Yeah, well, we're very lucky. New Zealand's tourism proposition to the world is spectacular, and Tourism New Zealand, who does kind of the marketing for New Zealand in that sense, I think does a great job. Our job is to basically complement what they're doing and sort of talk about things that aren't mentioned in tourism. So, talking about our mountains, our rivers, our lakes is wonderful to bring people here, but it doesn't help necessarily with investment or, cultural understanding or sports. And so we're trying to make sure that we're telling other stories of New Zealand that complement and build off it. So, for example, that this is a beautiful country. You might have heard that Lord of the Rings was shot here. Did you also know that actually the technology that created Lord of the Rings, all that incredible computer technology, was made here? So that's sort of extending. And then going even further, that technology that was used on Lord of the Rings is now doing breast cancer imaging, hyperscale computing, all sorts of other technologies come from New Zealand because of Lord of the Rings, because of our environment. When you kind of explain things or sort of take people on that journey, it all starts to be coherent and make sense.
Yeah, but how do you do it?
Oh, a lot of comms, marketing, content. Actually, our biggest trick is trying to get other people to do our job for us, frankly, because we're a small, tiny government agency. There's only like 15 of us, experts in brand and marketing and content. But actually, we don't have the money to go and buy billboards on the side of the road or put magazine articles out in all sorts of international newspapers and things like that. So essentially what we're trying to do is it's almost a national initiative to get, a national being in terms of a countrywide initiative, to get exporters to be on the same page, to get our politicians, our sports teams, our cultural icons, so that when they're representing New Zealand in the world, it's coherent and there's a kind of a brand narrative. Yeah, well, and talk about the truths of New Zealand. We did a piece of work a few years ago looking at what are the core values of the country. So what is the essence of New Zealand that we think should be perceived in the world? And that's things like trustworthiness, care for people and place in the environment, and then our sort of innovative, youthful, creative ingenuity. Yeah, and those aspects, when you bring them together, you can showcase lots of stories of New Zealand. And again, if you've got exporters going out there telling that story in their context, or you've got, sports teams or Hollywood stars or whatever it is, and they're all coherent, then suddenly New Zealand's image starts to grow. Well, suddenly, slowly, by the way. It takes a while to do this work.
Are we in an image rut of Derry, Lamb and Lord of the Rings?
No. Our problem is never that we have a lack of great stories. Our problem is our challenge is getting them out there in the world. So if you look at across New Zealand, and the research we recently did, which I think you're referring to, is qualitative research. We went out and asked lots of individuals, in groups, and this is much more expensive, much more difficult, but you get sort of 10 people around a table and you've got a couple of hours with them, and we do that like 5 or 6 times, in different countries and different aspects of the world. And we try and understand from them, what more do you know about New Zealand? And they do tend to go back to things that we as New Zealanders would consider sort of very simple, Oh, you're green, you've got grass, great quality food.
The grass is green.
I'd like to visit there. Exactly right. And I think maybe Lord of the Rings and etc. But actually, when you start to talk to them more about, our film sector, our creative sectors, the products that come from New Zealand, the technologies, Rocket Lab, our space industry, our whatever it might be, our sporting. People are really, really curious. As I say, our challenge is not that we don't have great stories. The challenge is often just getting them in front of people in a very noisy environment, media world, or people are not waking up in the morning and going, I wonder what's going on in New Zealand.
No.
We have to sort of put it in front of them and take opportunities when we can. One of the interesting things, for example, is that Māori culture was quite well recognised as being from New Zealand. It's one of the unique things about New Zealand. And if you go back to your point about Australia, actually, people, globally do mistake New Zealand and Australia, but they absolutely know Māori culture as New Zealand, not Australia. And they know the haka. They know some what we would consider, again, relatively simple things, tā moko, but they admire it and they're curious about it. And when news stories do hit the global media about things related to, te ao Māori, like the haka in Parliament, for example, that absolutely popped on our media monitoring services because people were curious about it and saw something, and we're trying to understand, what does this mean, and what is the country that this comes from. So,
but how does that specifically? How would that translate into soft power?
It's people's perception. Well, people. Again, the research would tell us that New Zealand is perceived as having a strong race relations, bicultural roots, and that's differentiated from other countries. Again, in New Zealand, often when you see things from afar, you see the big picture, and when you live in it, you see the finer detail. In New Zealand, we know that there are challenges, we know that there are things that always go perfectly, but when you're looking at it from overseas, you see a country where there is relative harmony, where there is a relationship between the indigenous Māori and the Europeans. And so that actually is positively perceived, and particularly in countries where they have their own indigenous populations. They see us as being a country to admire for the way that we do it.
So when we see conflict, they just see visibility.
Correct. And they don't understand. The conflict is less relevant. I mean, if I use again the haka in Parliament example, it was overall seen as a relatively positive thing, because this is something that was uniquely New Zealand's culture in a format that was, not what people expected to see it. It wasn't on a marae, for example. It was in a wood-panelled,
yes,
building.
The Westminster setting.
Exactly,
yeah.
And it was sort of that juxtaposition, I think, which made people go, oh, that was really interesting. What is it about that country's culture that allowed that to happen? Now, again, we in New Zealand go, actually, it didn't go that well. There was other things that happened subsequently, et cetera, et cetera. But that wasn't the story. The story was more, this is a culture where actually they bring their authenticity and their truth to a space like that.
What tangible benefits can you give me as examples of that soft power has driven?
The beautiful thing about this area is now really quite well researched, and there is a very strong correlation, if not a causation, between having a strong country reputation and the value that you can extract from your products and services, from your visitor economy, from being a trading nation, being an investment destination. So, and it makes sense intuitively. Would you put $1 million of your investment into Mozambique, or would you put it into Australia? Well, probably Australia sounds a bit safer. Well, actually, it might be the same investment. It's similarly with New Zealand. We're seen as a safe, trustworthy, reliable. We can showcase data that says we're actually one of the most trustworthy countries in the world, easiest place to do business, lowest corruption, regularly in the top, 5 or 6 of those sorts of metrics. That's soft power and action, and you can extract, premium prices. One of the other stats is, again, and this is research shows this, there's about a 25% premium pricing that you can get from being from a country that has high reputation. And again, if you think about it intuitively, would you buy a bar of chocolate from Uzbekistan or Switzerland? Probably Switzerland. It's probably the same cacao beans, probably been treated in the same way, probably would taste not that much different, but there's something about it being from Switzerland that makes it attractive. So that's sort of the same thing with New Zealand. Our products and services are perceived as being more valuable because of our reputation, particularly in the food space, actually.
But like you said, we don't have the billboard budget, so we're sort of as a guerrilla marketing the whole way.
If you could get the billboard budget, that would be great. I'd love it. But actually, I'm not sure it would work for a country like us. The guerrilla marketing, it's every little touch point. This is the frustration and the joy of the job sometimes, is that we can't actually control what the global media says. We can do a whole lot of this incredible brand work and structure it, and then all of a sudden, John Oliver decides to look at the Bird of the Year, and it becomes this big, funny New Zealand, here you go again.
John Oliver waged a war.
I don't just want the Puteki Teki to win. I want it to win in the biggest landslide in the history of this magnificent competition. Puteki Teki.
Which is not necessarily the image we always want to have in the world, but we can't control that. And it's certainly an aspect of that is interesting.
It was a great deal of fun.
Oh, it was a great deal of fun, but as New Zealanders, you go, it's sort of perpetuating this myth of us being sort of unsophisticated.
Yeah.
We actually reached out to his team and invited him to come down and talk to us, and others have done that, those talk shows. But we don't get to control that bit of it.
Yeah.
But if we can sort of encourage that every time that you're out there in the world, as a New Zealander, you are sort of representing the authentic New Zealand. You shouldn't be something you're not. And every exporter does that, and every politician does that, and every sports team when they travel, and every cultural exchange, then you start to build the reputation. So it's a long run game.
But what if it starts unravelling? We do still kind of have that clean green thing.
Yeah.
And then, last week, Canterbury declared that it had a nitrate emergency.
Correct, yeah.
What happens when your backpacker comes over here expecting it to all be Edelweiss and Snowy Mountains, and
daisies here, mate.
Yeah, and they can't swim in the streams or drink the water.
Well, absolutely. We've got to be. This thing about brand is brands have to be authentic, and our job is thinking about the brand of New Zealand. In a country of 5.5 million people, you can't control everything that everyone does all the time. There will be things that are not on brand. On the whole, though, if the general direction is right. It actually takes, the research again tells you that it takes a hell of a lot to change the perception of a brand, both for the positive and the negative. It would take a substantial period of time of things that are not on brand for it to have a damaging impact. That doesn't mean, it doesn't mean we shouldn't do things and we shouldn't be high aspiration, but actually it's not as tragic as you think. And similarly, you can do very positive things. During COVID, for example, we were perceived for a while there as having a very strong COVID response. Our leadership was looked up to, etc.
New Zealand is one of the greatest places on earth. The people are incredible. The landscapes are absolutely breathtaking. It's home to both Lord and Lord of the Rings. I'm also a huge admirer of New Zealand Prime Minister, and I'm going to say personal friend, Jacinda Ardern.
And we actually popped up the rankings in the global soft power, but over the next 2 or 3 years, it sort of just went back to where it was before, sort of settled back to its normal position. So actually the thing to do is small things regularly over a long period of time.
Now, speaking of the international arena, the United States, the latest things that I've seen appearing on, commentary on soft power is that America is slipping down the ranks, or if it's not slipping, it's number one at the moment, right?
Yep. Always seems to be up in those top ones, yeah.
If it's not slipping actually down the ranks, it is being perceived as losing its grip on soft power because of all the things that are happening there. Yeah. Can you talk to me about that? What factors are happening over there that is causing it to sink?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting phenomenon here because having a high reputation or influence is not necessarily always positive. it is for a country like New Zealand, where when these things line up of having strong reputation, strong influence, and strong familiarity, you're usually doing pretty well. But if you think about a country like Russia, it has very strong influence but very poor reputation. America's has traditionally been the country that you almost has all three of them. Very very high understanding of what America is and what it does, very high influence on the rest of the world in things like consumer affairs or just its political or military, and then actually a pretty high reputation. Most people have pretty much looked up to the US over a long period of time. What we're seeing now, I think, is and I'm in dangerous territory here, but I think you're seeing a country that's not necessarily behaving the way it always used to, predictably living up to some of the aspects that made that reputation. So it's no longer seen as reliably doing the things that you would expect the US to do, stepping in as the global peacemaker or whatever it might be. And that can damage over time. I would have to say, though, and again, the sort of science would show you behind this, is that that's not necessarily permanent or fatal, because brands will reset back to a normal position. So, it wouldn't necessarily take a hell of a lot for US to regain some of that ground that it's lost. It's still, the powerhouse of the world economy, still got incredible innovation. Its influence on our daily lives is probably greater than any other country in terms of things like our technologies and our cultural perceptions. So it's not a long-term thing necessarily.
Well, perceptions of America are changing. In New Zealand, we're still known for the same old stuff: our landscapes, primary produce, and yes, Lord of the Rings. I asked Newsroom business reporter Alice Peacock if she thought we're in a rut, and if so, does it matter?
I mean, what we're known for, we're still doing pretty well from. If we think of dairy, if we think of wine, and there's always space to get into other kind of big export markets where there would be more value add for New Zealand as well. In terms of whether we need to be changing the perception that people have of us, though, I think that's kind of up for interpretation. We still do pretty well in terms of tourism, in terms of our amazing landscapes and our outdoor activities. We've got these great walks that people travel all this way to do. But I think from an economic sense, it would be great to, have perhaps some big consumer brands or some more products which New Zealand's economy could benefit from, and that perhaps New Zealand could be kind of put on the map for as well. The influence of Lord of the Rings is still there, but I think it would be fair to say that it is aging out. It was, a quarter of a century ago. It would be a bit weird if it wasn't. Lord of the Rings for New Zealand and New Zealand's economy was massive. We've got kind of two prongs of that in terms of the creation of it and the boost to the economy, particularly in Wellington. And then we've got the success of that and the roll-on impacts in terms of what that did for New Zealand's tourism, putting New Zealand on the map, boost to the film industry, and the kind of general roll-on economic success of the franchise.
The trouble is, it seems as soon as a New Zealand brand gets huge, it gets eaten up by a world player. Think Rocket Lab.
It's really a size thing. I mean, again, it's hard for New Zealand to compete with these economies where they just have such big levels of capital compared to what we have here. And they have kind of infrastructure, business infrastructure set up, which makes it easier to grow. So I think, again, it's all kind of part of it. And I think we can't and shouldn't be trying to stop these companies from going abroad and kind of increasing their size and success. But unfortunately, it does sometimes lead to New Zealand losing the benefits, perhaps, of what we've grown here.
What are the sorts of things that we should avoid doing in New Zealand to avoid damaging the perceptions of us?
It's an interesting question. I mean, what I took from the report was that there is, a desire to learn more about Māori culture and for more of that culture to be exported, and at a risk of sounding like it's really just commoditising it, people are really interested and they want to know more about it. It's something that they want to see the culture kind of in practice when they come to New Zealand for a visit. I don't think that there would be an immediate impact on the perception of New Zealand and how people kind of view that culture if we're talking about recent announcements like the government dictating that Māori words be cut out of, say, school books. But I do think that there is a bit of a risk that there's kind of a flow-on impact of that if it does damage relations between cultures in New Zealand and how we see Māori culture ourselves. You know, other nations see that, and headlines obviously can do a bit of damage, and I think there is a risk that there would be kind of negative impacts of that down the line.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by William Saunders and produced by Gwen McClure. Thanks to David Downs and Alice Peacock. I'm Alexia Russell. Mā te wā.